So Christmas is over, and we're taking down the decorations. And as W.H. Auden said in his wonderful poem, "For the time being, we have drunk such a lot, we've stayed up so late, we've attempted quite unsuccessfully to love all our relatives, and in general we have grossly overestimated our powers." Well, that's Christmas. The other thing at Christmas I always find in the family is we reminisce about other Christmases and about other times when we gathered together with grannies and aunties and all the people we hoped wouldn't stay too long. And I remember this Christmas about when I was a teenager, a keen evangelical with a zipped-up Bible. And I was very keen on believing. I believed a virgin had a baby. I believe a carpenter turned water into wine. I believed that the carpenter also healed the lepers, and that Jesus rose from the dead. But as I grew older, things changed. My beliefs fell out like teeth. I tried hard to believe, but things didn't make sense. And I tried very hard to pray, on my knees, by my bed, with my head in the eiderdown, with my eyes closed. But my prayers hung like icicles from my lips, and there didn't seem anyone to melt them. I really tried. I really tried to pray, like Michael Ramsey, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was asked how to pray. And he said, "Well, I close my eyes, get on my knees, and hope for the best." When we move from the Bible, we move from a pile of stories. Stories about Pharisees and Sadducees, stories about wise men with gold and frankincense and myrrh. We move from these stories, and some of them make sense, and some of them seem too far-fetched for anything, especially some of the miracles. Stories. That's what we share Sunday by Sunday here, with this unimaginable, unpoetic load of stories that I often feel leave me trapped in a religious fantasy, left with a load of myths. But wait for a moment. That word myths gets very bad currency, because I believe myth is what lies at the heart of our faith. And it's what's been at the heart of the stories of Christmas. Because myths are not fairy stories. Myths are stories, may be true, may not be true, but they are stories that actually make our lives real. We live myths. Doesn't matter whether they're true or false. They are so significant in the way we move on in our lives. Cinderella's not a true story, it's a myth. But we can use it as a story to move on. Perhaps the birth of Christ is not a true, factual story, but it's a myth that leads us on to understand what the incarnation, God made man, is all about. That's what myth is. Not weird stories, but stories that help us live our lives. Stories lead to theology. So, when the wise men come to Jesus at the Epiphany, we are told in the story they bring gold and frankincense and myrrh. That's not a factual story, as if Mary and Joseph are being set up as lotto winners. It's theology. It's a theology that gold is about kingship, frankincense is about divinity, and myrrh is about the fact that the whole story of Christ is set in the reality of the death of Christ on the cross. Gold, the king. Frankincense, the God. And myrrh, the death of Christ, in whom we touch the love of God, and God says, you are redeemed, you are loved, you are of inestimable value. So that's, I believe, what stories are about, leading us into theology. And our gospel reading today talks about the establishment of the church, John the Baptist, setting up a community of faith, setting up people who live the story together. And that's what we are here to do. Sunday by Sunday, we tell the story. Sunday by Sunday, we know these stories. They're part of us. They're in our souls. They're in our hearts. They're in our heads. And in those stories, we find the theology of God, the love of God, the reality of God. And we share that as the church. I believe it would be great if here at St. Matthew's we spent more time telling each other our stories. Not coming to church for an hour and disappearing back to the white highlands of West Auckland, but staying here and sharing the stories. The stories that make us tick. The stories by which we can touch the loving God in each other. I believe that's what story is. Not fantasy, not made up, but the very reality of you and me loving each other, touching each other, being with each other, intimate, caring. And I believe that's what happened in the manger. I believe that's what happened in the life of Christ with Mary and Joseph and the disciples, and the story that unfolds now through the year. That we learn that God is love as we talk and touch each other. The person sitting next to you now, perhaps you chose to sit next to them. Perhaps you're sitting next to them by accident. Perhaps you've never met them before. Here is an opportunity for us to learn what makes our neighbour tick. And as we do that, so we learn to know what makes God tick in us. So before you go home today, please talk to your neighbour. Please find out what makes them tick, just a little bit. Too much might be too much. Enjoy each other. Perhaps you're visiting this church for the first time. Perhaps you've been coming for decades. Here we find and experience together the truth of the love of God. And here we tell our stories. They're myths, but they're real. Let's enjoy them and let's be together. And in that, we find the theology of God made man in Jesus. Amen.